Hello, hello, hello. Anybody home?
Yes, good night. Good evening.
Tonight, Ebony.
Good night.
Good night. Good night.
I cannot believe that we're in our final session already. Where did all the time go? There's no question that time truly flies. This is just one more example of that. 12 weeks ago, you guys were thinking, God, 12 weeks. Now, suddenly, we're at the end of it, and you're getting ready for your finals, and then you're done, just like that. All right, let's see who's in the war room tonight. Danielle.
Good day. I'm here.
Danielle is in the war room. India. Not yet. Trying to make up her mind. Gretchen.
Hi, right there.
Okay, Gretchen is in the war room. Great. Rose, I think, popped up earlier, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And then we have Ebony. Yes, this is here.
Yes, sir.
Most of us are here. That's great. And Karen. I don't see Karen yet. All right. So let me just say this first of all. For those of you who were able to complete the makeup exam by the deadline, fantastic job. I see, despite the short period of time, some persons are able to meet the deadline and do a very good job of responding to those questions. I hope that by doing that, it would have reinforced a whole lot of the stuff that we had learned, plus give you an opportunity to see exactly the areas perhaps where you thought you may have been comfortable with but not quite. And then having to go through the makeup, it would allow you to see where your quote unquote strengths and weaknesses might have been, and to help you prepare and be ready for next week. Okay. For those of you who did not meet the deadline, let me just say this. If you are interested in extra credit at all, I encourage you to go ahead and do the makeup. You will not get the same amount of credit that your colleagues who met the deadline will get, but you will get credit. So I encourage you to go ahead and do the makeup exam. And for that, for those who are interested in that, you have until tomorrow night at 12 o'clock to get the makeup exam in for me. If I don't see anything by tomorrow, 12 o'clock, I will assume that you chose not to do that and you'll just go with your original position. Okay. So you still have an opportunity to get some credit if you so desire. All right. Remember, for next week's examination, I don't believe it'll be as intense as the midterm examination, but that doesn't mean that your preparation should be any less intense. Please prepare as if you're going to be um, going into the type of examination that you anticipate, so that whatever little questions come your way this time, you will be more than ready to deal with them. As usual, I will be asking primarily core questions. I'm not going to drag you into the mud with all the miscellaneous details that we've read and discussed in class. That's just for working purposes. But for exam purposes, just focus on the key points, key topics, key points. And if you do that, and what things mean, and if you do that, you cannot and should not go wrong. Remember, the secret is to make those short notes, which I hope you've been making, and then go over them over and over and over again every day, all day, until examination time and you're sick of it. And if you do that, you should do far better than you anticipate. That's kind of the key. If you don't do that, then you may not see your way through as well as you would like. The solution is simple, but it does require your commitment. And then when you're done, you're done. All right. Any questions before we get into our final discussion this evening? Okay, okay. Well, the examination next week will be the same as midterm, same format, a few definitions and some short answer questions. I don't think you will have 18 like you had the last time. Probably a little less than that, maybe 12 or so questions, somewhere around there. So if you have been preparing, you should you should be fine. Okay? Um, I think the examination started what time last time? 6:30 was it? Of
Good
it?
day, Mr. Wilkinson. One quick question. So the exam starts from internal control, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. So that should be, if I remember correctly, 5 modules altogether. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. Beginning with internal control, vouching, verification, practical applications that we did last week, and then today, professional ethics. All right. Again, stick to the main topics, stick to the main points, and exhaust yourself in it. Right. Don't get too bogged down in the italics and the, for example, this means that the chicken is a rat kind of thing. That's not. I'm not saying it's not important, but I'm saying, use a little technique and focus on the key stuff because I'll be asking questions on the key stuff. Right? But this is why I take time during the class time for us to talk and read and go through the details so that come examination time when I raise my questions, I will just be testing your ability to recall and your understanding of the key issues that you will carry with you when you get out there in the world. Okay, so tonight we talk about professional ethics, a topic that really affects every profession. We're talking about it from an auditing perspective to remind auditing students and persons who are working in an audit environment that auditors are expected to maintain a certain level of professional ethics and conduct in their work. They're expected to behave a certain way in carrying out their duties because the audit function is a critical function, as you now know. Um, Whatever the auditors have to say, the world believes, which is why when auditors are found being unethical, it really does put a damper on the audit profession. It puts a damper on the firms that they are auditing, and it has a very negative impact in general on the business world. Okay? So we put a lot of reliance in the results of an audit because we expect auditors under their professional ethics to be honest in their work, to have a standard that is above the normal standard, quote unquote, in their business behavior, and to be guided by those principles that are upstanding, true, and fair. If we cannot expect these things from our auditors, we're in trouble. And in recent years, some auditors have been found guilty of not conducting their work as required. Many of them have been fined millions of dollars for misconduct, unethical behavior. I don't know if anybody in this class may have seen any articles to that effect anywhere, but whether you've seen them or not, they have been happening, and we hope that we don't see that too often with our auditors. And our auditors are like our bankers and our doctors and our lawyers. We expect for them to be ethical in their work and do those things that are in our best interests. Okay? Unfortunately, that's not 100%, but we have to keep striving for 100%. Whatever the standards that have been set by the auditing firm, auditors as professionals are expected to carry out those standards of behavior. They're expected to exercise whatever specialist knowledge they have in terms of getting the work done. If they don't know something, they're not expected to pretend and mess things up. They're expected to consult and find out from somebody who does know. Okay, all of these things have impact on the behavior and the work of the auditor, and so this whole discussion this afternoon is going to be about those things that the auditor should be thinking about. And the reason why we are discussing it is so that we can be aware of what the auditor should be thinking about in our firms when they come in to look at things. And also, there's a lot of stuff that you guys as individual employees should be able to pick out of this discussion on ethics to help you to determine how you should behave as employees in your organization. So it's kind of a twofold thing. Yes, the focus is on the auditor, but certainly the focus is always on is also on you as an employee in any capacity, whether it's clerical, supervisory, managerial, senior management, whatever that might be. You too have a responsibility to act ethically in and for your organization. Make sure you're doing the right thing, doing things right. That's really the whole deal. Now, since auditors are expected sometimes to make judgment calls on certain issues, that means that they have to apply skill and experience in trying to reach their conclusions. They cannot allow people to influence them, politics, personal relationships, money, anything of this nature to influence their professional judgment. And oftentimes, if anybody wants to change their judgment, change their mind, they like to offer things like money, more money, more money, trips somewhere, free hotel, free jet rides, girls in bikinis, or all kinds of crazy stuff. But maybe even guys in bikinis now to get persons to act unethically. And sometimes they are successful. But for the most part, we like to believe that majority of persons are behaving the way they should. So what then are the objectives of professional ethics? And again, we're talking about the auditor, but this applies to any profession, including the plumbing profession. By the way, is plumbing a profession? Anyone? Is plumbing a profession?
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is. Okay. It is not necessarily as fancy as the law or medicine, accounting maybe, and auditing, but it is certainly a profession. And it happens to be a very critical profession. Every day of my life, I hate to think what would happen to us if there were no plumbers in the world. Life would be a really big problem. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, but when my plumber shows up, I expect him to act ethically, to be honest with me, to not try to jip me and jerk me around, overcharge me, and do a good job, not a halfway job, so I can call him back in 2 more days so he can do it all over again. These are all unethical things that we should not expect out of our professionals, plumbers included. Okay? All right, some food for thought. So what is the objective of these professional ethics? Well, certainly with regards to the firm, to uphold and sustain the economic well-being of the firm. As long as auditors are honest, they come in and do honest work, they report honestly on what the firm is doing. If there are any problems, that when the auditors report honestly, the firm can then go ahead, quote unquote, and correct those problems and then move forward. Unfortunately, when we don't do this, many firms suffer as a result of poor auditing practices, and sometimes they even end up out of business, unfortunately. And some of those situations are oftentimes directly related to poor audits, oftentimes poor audits caused by unethical behavior by certain auditors. Okay? Who would believe? And rightly so. When those guys walk in, we expect them to be doing the right thing. Whenever they don't, it's a big shock each time for obvious reasons, because we can't have that too often. They are expected to perform at the highest level of ethical behavior and professional judgment without any question. What their work should not ever be brought in question, just like a doctor or other professional. that when we think about these professionals, we should be thinking they have our interest at heart. They are professionals, they're doing the best job they can, and they're doing things the right way. That is what we should be believing at all times. Okay? Please bear in mind that self-interest should not be a part of the auditor's duties. In other words, the auditor cannot be thinking, how can I make things better for me by doing something unethical in this particular firm, by listening to management and not reporting a very important bit of information because they say they'll pay me more money next year. They'll pay me some money on the side, or whatever the case might be. These things cannot and should not be allowed or be happening within the practice of audit and any other professional practice for that matter. Now we'll see in a little while that there's some code of ethics by some accounting bodies which govern the ethical practices of the auditor and by extension the accountant. And these codes have been developed so that not only auditors can refer to them on a regular basis, but companies who hire auditors and individual and staff members and others who are interested can actually go and look at these requirements to see what they should be expecting from the auditor. Okay? So there's a lot of scrutiny going on, and for good reason. Those auditors who have messed up in the past, they have created a whole lot of problems for everyone, and we cannot have too many of those too often. Okay? All right. Now, one of the key objectives with the auditor's work happens to be the question of credibility. The auditor's credibility should never be brought into question. The auditor should behave in a way that we always believe that they're doing the right thing and that the quality of work and the confidentiality levels are second to none. And notice these words, they are very, very important words for the auditor, but by extension, they're very important words for every one of you in this class in terms of the work that you do. Okay, so words like credibility and professionalism and quality of work and confidentiality, these are the underpinnings for the auditor's work, and they should be the underpinning for all the work that we do as far as possible. Okay? The auditor must be acting at all times in the public's interest, in the interest of their client, and never in their personal interests. Never. Okay? Too many people rely on the information from the auditor. The government, financial institutions, the clients, the employees who work for the firm, investors who have money in the firm, investors who want to put money into the firm. All of these people are hoping that auditors do their jobs right, because when they pick up an audit report, serious decisions will be made with regards to the results of that audit report. Decisions in the millions and billions of dollars. So this is very serious business. Decisions about the future direction of the company. The decisions about what the board should do as a result of the audit reports. So a lot of serious decisions are based on the results of an audit. And so the burden of doing the audit right in any capacity, no matter what entity it is, whether it's a financial institution, a health institution, a government institution, does not matter, because the consequences of not doing it right are grave. Okay? And so these are the kinds of things to keep in mind when we think about audit objectives. Okay, for sure. All right. I believe we may have said already at some point in the past that the auditor must be objective and independent. Anybody remember what do we mean by an independent auditor? Anyone? What do we mean by an independent auditor?
You mean the external auditors?
Yeah, the external. What do you mean by independent? For the external auditor. Make a guess.
Could you
Must not
repeat that,
be
please?
employed. It must not, like, the auditor must not be employed or have any interest in the company.
Yeah, first of all, the auditor must not have any interest in the company. Why do you think that is a requirement?
Well, that could be because they now can, you know, make changes to make the company look better because of the interest they have in it.
Absolutely. Or lie about things so that nobody will know that things are not right because they have an interest in the company. So that obviously is very important. Auditor cannot be buying shares, sitting on the board, being all cuddly with the chairman and all this kind of stuff. Those things would then take away from the auditor's independence, and they would not oftentimes be able to do their jobs effectively. So when they come into the firm, they're not coming in to be anybody's buddy from the board all the way down. They're coming in to do the job, and they don't need any relationships to cause them not to maintain that independence. Okay? Very crucial. Now, the other question about independence is, can the internal auditor be independent as well? Anybody?
They, in terms of being independent as an internal auditor,
Yeah, can an internal auditor be independent?
no, they would be working there because they're internal.
Yeah, they're hired by the firm, so it's hard for them to be independent.
Independent, yeah. I mean, in terms of being independent, as in what type of access they have to the system to be able to make changes. That
Well,
would be independence that they need to not be able to make changes or access to the system to be able to make changes.
that may be one of the things that might be necessary to some extent, but certainly, um, if the management is threatening them in terms of their employment or their salary increase or bonuses or whatever, that can cause some auditors to not be as independent as they need to be. So rather than do the job 100% correctly because of fear of these things coming from the top management level from time to time, they may not necessarily be complete in their jobs. And of course, if you're working for the firm, telling the firm what's right and wrong oftentimes become a challenging situation. But the internal auditor is nevertheless expected to be as independent as possible, go out into the company and find problems. When those problems are discovered, they're required to disclose them to the board, whether the board likes it or not. If you're going to lose your bonus as a result, you still have to disclose it. And this is the problem for the internal auditor. Okay? It's much harder for an internal auditor to maintain independence, but they must get up every day with an effort to try. They're not going to always be successful in that venture, but every day they get up, they have to try to do the job as best as they can. Some of you might already know that your job requirements can be compromised from time to time by your supervisor, by management people. Indirect threats can be made against you in terms of your employment and your promotion or whatever folks do to get you to do the wrong thing or to do those things that you know you shouldn't do. Internal auditors are no less subject to these things. And so it's a real challenge. Compliance officers, risk managers, and so on are definitely facing these kinds of problems. And despite all of this, they're required to try and be as independent as possible and do their jobs to the best of their abilities. Okay? The internal auditor doesn't really have that problem. They only have that problem if they choose to have it by coming in and letting the management compromise them. But other than that, if they choose not to have it, then they certainly do not have that problem. Okay? For sure. All right. So in terms of professional ethics and the code of conduct that professionals should be looking at, there are two bodies that exhibit significant codes of conduct for professional accountants and auditors. And those are the two bodies that we're going to look at primarily, the IFAC and the AICPA. Both of them have developed codes of conduct for their members to encourage them and to remind them of what their professional responsibilities are. And certainly if they have to take any action against any member, they can use this code of conduct as a weapon to show that the member violated some sacred code somewhere by doing something they should not have done. Okay? All right, who else might have a code of conduct in the profession? Anyone? Which other profession might have a code of professional conduct? Can you think of one other than the auditor?
Every establishment should have a code of conduct.
Yeah, every establishment certainly should, and certainly every professional certainly should. But not only the professionals. Most firms and entities should have some kind of code of conduct that governs the behavior of employees within the firm and where violations can result in some kind of action. Okay? So this thing is not just for the auditors only, as you can see. It's for all of us in whatever area that we're in to be guided to some extent. Auditors have a specific responsibility in terms of their audit functions, but so do all of us in our jobs from day to day. We too have to go out there every day and exhibit some degree of ethics, what is right and what is wrong, to do the right thing, not to do the wrong thing. Okay, not to get involved in fraudulent behavior and collusion and all this crazy stuff, moving assets that don't belong to us and so on. Okay, so this ethics thing is not just for the auditor. We're talking about the auditor, but by all means, it extends to all of us. Even the bishop has to be ethical. Make sure he doesn't run off with any of the church money, only his own. Okay, and so on.
Mr. Lucas, I have a quick question, right? This is
Yeah.
where these are the sorts of things that I get confused on in the exam, right?
Yes.
So this first one says the IFAC Code of Conduct for Professional Accountants, and then you would ask a question like, what is the IFC Code for Ethics for Professional Accountants? And then turn around and ask, what is the IFC Code of Ethics threats to objectivity and independence? I think you're trying to trick us when you do stuff like that.
I do stuff like that.
Yeah, it's very tricky because that you now have to memorize exactly the wording that you studied for, as opposed to, you know, you don't think that's tricky?
It might be depending on how you perceive it, but sometimes examiners might raise a question that appears to be tricky just to see if you're on your game. But the whole examination is certainly not designed to be a trick or big old trick question or big old set of trick questions. But yes, every now and then you might get one or two questions that appear tricky. So because the examiner wants to see if you can separate the sheep from the goat in terms of your understanding of the material. So yeah, every now and then. But generally, no, we don't set out to like totally deceive you and trick you straight through the examination. Most of the questions are straightforward. Okay, so if you run across one or two of them, don't panic, come up with your best response and keep moving. That's the key. All right. Now, in this particular case, a question that I might ask that's not tricky is to list two well-known codes of professional ethics. And then all you have to say is IFAC and AICPA. That's kind of the way I will generally raise it. But that doesn't mean that I might not come up with one that requires you to, kind of think about it a little bit more. But most of them will be kind of like that. Okay. If you look, for example, at the table for IFAC Code of Ethics for Professional Accountants, there are 5 of them. Can anybody tell me what the 5 are?
The 5 what?
The 5 IFAC Codes of Ethics for Professional Accountants. and auditors.
Why you gotta ask for 5? Why you just gonna ask for 2 or 3?
Well, this is not the exam. I want 5 because you.
Integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, professional behavior.
I read that today. Hopefully I can remember.
Indeed. Now, I may not ask for 5, but I might because 5 is not a lot.
There's a lot.
No,
You
it's
gotta
not.
try and remember 5 things in all kind of different ways.
Now, remember, everything seems a little weird if you don't get engrossed in it. You have to keep going over stuff. Remember I told you? All right? You have to keep going over and over and over stuff. And if you go over that a couple of times before you know it, the 5 will be nothing. Because I mean, 3 of them you can remember right away: integrity, objectivity, and confidentiality. The only 2 you have to stress about is professional competence and behavior. See my point? So don't let that stuff like cause you to panic. Just keep doing it over and over. A lot of students don't like to go over and over stuff until they know it. They like to do the little 1, 2 and think that's going to work. That's not going to work. Well, for some students it works because some students like have this ability to remember crap after the 1, 2. But some of us are not like that. We have to go over that crap over and over and over until exam time, and even the 5 minutes before, look at it.
I think I forgot though. That's standard stuff.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Mostly,
right-
we should remember objectivity since it's pertaining to audit and everything is audit objectives, this and that.
Yeah, and you should remember integrity because that has to do with honesty. And you should remember confidentiality. That's have to do with keeping people's information private.
That's a daily thing task to do, especially if you're working in a
Every,
bank and everywhere you go, gotta sign
of,
up.
of course, remember I told you, this is not just only for the auditor, this is for everybody in one form or another.
And
So
you should
this
always maintain a professional behavior.
always. And of course, for the auditor, the number 5 would be the competence. If you don't remember professional, just put competence. That's it. Okay. So this don't worry about it. Just pick your key topics. Remember, I told you I'm going to question your key topics. And a key topic here is to list 1 or more of the IFAC codes of ethics. And if you learn them, that's easy points. And then right under that is a description for each one. And so if you learn each one and then a brief description on each one, that might be double points even, because I might say list and describe the 5 OFAC codes. So you get a point for listing them and you get a point for describing it.
Yeah, I like listen, describe.
Okay? No, I know. I know. But this is the madness that examinations are all about, as I'm sure you know. I've written a gazillion examinations and I hated every last one. I can't think of one examination I could say I enjoyed. Well, I really enjoyed that. Hell no. They all stank. Okay? But if I expected to get through what I want to get through, I have to go through it over and over. While everybody's sleeping, I'm up studying. While everybody's having lunch, I'm studying. While everybody's to the mall, I'm studying. While everybody's away in Fort Lauderdale, I'm studying. Back in whatever it was. I didn't take vacations. I used my vacation time to go home and study and prepare for final exams. See? But that's called a sacrifice. And so I encourage you, if you want to do really well, the difference between Tingham and Tingham them is a sacrifice. So let me just throw that in there. Okay. Okay. So what is integrity? We already know it has to do with honesty in our actions. What is objectivity? Anybody? What is objectivity?
Don't let nobody influence you, bias and all that stuff.
Yeah, don't let anybody influence you. Don't be biased. Okay? Because the
yeah.
person is your friend, you decided that you won't report something you won't report because they might be
Or influence you the way you think and I guess make a decision. Try to keep
that you shouldn't make. Yes. Okay. What is professional competence? Anyone?
Let's see.
Or what is competence?
test the ability to perform a task
Yeah,
on knowledge of thereof.
yeah, keep it
Let's
simple.
say, I see what that's like, maintain professional knowledge and skill. That little couple words good enough.
Yeah, keep it simple. Just use the keywords. That's what I've been telling you guys from way back when. We go through these discussions in class so that you can get the general feel for how this thing works. But when it's time to begin reviewing and consolidating, you make your notes and you keep them simple. See that? The knowledge and skill. That's more than enough to describe competence. You will get credit for that. You don't need to remember
Professional
the
service.
whole paragraph. If you could remember, fine. I'm not going to fight you with it. But the rest of us, man, you're not going to remember all that. Okay? Some people have photographic memory, so remember all kinds of crap. The rest of us, man, we have to make sure keynotes and just keep going over that over and over until exam time. What about confidentiality? What's that?
Keeping your mouth shut, not talking
Yeah.
what you said, talk what you see.
Yeah, keep your mouth shut. Do not discuss the affairs of your clients.
Clients.
Simple. Now, even when you snuggle up with your spouse or your bestest girlfriend or boyfriend, you still can't discuss it. Even though you discuss everything with your mommy, you can't tell her stuff about your client.
Of
Even
course,
when
that's
you're
what
talking to your
you
best friend in your
Right.
pajamas at your regular weekend pajama party or whatever, you cannot discuss your client's business. Sorry, that's what confidentiality is all about. And
But
that
especially, but especially if you're obtaining it from the job or in a professional setting.
any kind of information that's confidential should never be discussed. You don't have to be an auditor and accountant. Any information. If you're a teller in the bank and you know that somebody has $10,000 in their account, you should not discuss it with anybody. How about that? And that's only the teller in the bank. Okay? You go to the doctor to have something done, it's the doctor's and nurse's responsibility to keep it confidential. They should not go home and start talking about the big lump you had on your head and this thing you had on your tuft in your butt. Oh, they should not do that. It is called confidentiality. A lot of us are still not practicing it as well as we should. This is just a reminder, as we discuss the auditor's responsibility, to remind us that no matter how tempted we might be sometimes, there's certain things in our professions and the work that we do that we should not discuss with anyone. Okay? And the way to remind ourselves about that is to simply say, would I want anyone to discuss it about me? And usually the answer is no. Okay? And then number 5, what do we call professional behavior? Anyone? What is professional behavior?
Rules and regulations to comply with the rules,
Yeah,
the laws and regulations.
follow the rules and don't do anything that will discredit the profession or yourself. But if you say follow the rules and regulations, that's more than enough for professional behavior. So all of a sudden, the IFAC code and its description goes from being a big old stinky looking thing on the page to something quite manageable. See my point? But you have to sit down and take the time to make the necessary notations so that when it's time to study it, you'll have the right information and you just focus on the key points. A lot of students don't want to take the hours it takes to make simple, good notes to study because a lot of students don't understand that the hours you take to make good notes to study is part of the study process. In fact, probably half of the success story. We just want to pick up our pieces of paper or go on the screen and look at stuff and see if it'll just sink in and stay. Doesn't work that way unless you're one of those students.
Mr. Wilkinson,
Yes.
every time I call your name, I just remember the little rude boy on I think I'm Little Rascal. Question, I gotta ask this question again, right? Because I
Yeah.
read and I show up, I see some IFAC. Okay, this is similar to OFAC. But what does IFAC stand for now?
International Federation of Accountants.
Federation of Accounting, AC's accountant.
Well, not necessarily.
What the C for?
Anybody knows what the C is for?
I trying to ask now.
Nobody's curious? I deliberately didn't say anything because I want to see if anybody's going to get curious. Now you've gotten curious. So if you're curious, what's the next thing you should do?
Google it.
Why not? Why don't you do that? Let's see what it means.
All right. See.
I'm waiting for you. Imagine how excited your colleagues will be now that you're Googling it. They don't have to wonder anymore. Or unless they've already Googled it. IFAC, what does it mean?
The International Federation of Accounts. That's it. Nothing come up. No, C don't stand for nothing. I guess the AC's account.
Absolutely. Okay? And now that you've Googled it, you'll hardly ever forget it. That's
Oh,
what
and it is a global organization representing the accounting profession.
indeed. Okay? And by extension, the auditing. Now, auditors have some of their own crap going on, but the principles are pretty much the same. Okay? Because professional accountants tend to be auditors 95% of the time. All right, so there you have it. You not only, so no, IFAC is no longer a secret code anymore. IFAC is something you now know. You know what the code is for those persons who are operating under IFAC, and you'll be surprised how well you remember that as a result of the process. Okay? All right, so now that we know what the codes are and what they mean, something else crops up. There are some threats. Remember we said under IFAC you need to be objective and independent? Well, there are some threats to your being objective and independent. And these threats are very important to know. And now you need to learn the threats. First, you need to learn the code under IFAC, then you need to learn the threats. Because these threats will affect your ability to execute the codes. That's the point. Okay? So what are the threats? Well, there is the self-interest threat. There is the self-review threat. There is the advocacy threat. There is the familiarity threat. And then last but not least, there is the bloody intimidation threat, which is a very common threat. Because whenever companies want to intimidate an auditor, they'll say, if you don't do what we want, we won't call you back next year. And then the auditor panics because next year they can't look forward to that $10 million invoice because the company is large.
So how much auditors is made?
Working persons,
Yeah, so
anywhere from $40,000 a year for a new auditor to $200,000 or more for audit partners. The partners are like the senior management who run the audit firm.
so how much when I finish this course I supposed to make now?
That depends on your organization. How long have you been auditing?
I just starting out, sir.
Exactly.
I
So they're not trying even to discuss how much they should pay you at this point.
pay nothing.
I know. That's okay. Because now that you have this information, when you are done, you walk into your HR department, whoever needs to do it, give them your certificate. So when the next
I
performance,
just need to find another job. You want to hire say?
well, is another job the answer?
Yeah, I think I need one.
Well, we shall see. You don't know that yet. You just started auditing. You have to give it an
That's
opportunity.
it's different. No, no. It the setup is completely different than a private friend. So I need to go somewhere where I can really practice it.
Well, let me put it this way. In order to be an external auditor, you need to be professionally qualified. You need to be a CPA.
I'm not going to do my CPA. I talk in terms of being an internal auditor.
If you go to be an internal auditor in a private sector area, well, that is an option. And so, and maybe you might make a little bit more than where you are, perhaps. But now you have the option once you've done This stuff, you have something to go into looking into the private sector with, and then you go from there.
Yeah, so don't do us in an exam. You see up all your notes, the stuff behind us every day to work.
That's good. And I'm sure one way or the other, you're going to find those very useful. Okay, for sure. Don't do yourself in by not properly studying and preparing. How about that? You have to make the commitment. There's no magic formula. Study, study, study. Study those notes over and over and over and over and over and over until you're sick of them. No shortcuts.
Yeah, so at least
Shortcuts,
yes, sir.
yeah. Shortcuts stink for more than one reason, even though I understand why we do it. But don't do it. It's miserable taking the long, correct route, but at the end of the day, the rewards are very satisfying. Okay? I'm sure you know that. All right. So, by definition, then, what is a self interest threat? Anyone? Keep it simple.
If you let the company bribe you from, and you don't give them a true and fair view, you just give them a few to pass or make whatever. Or you
Okay. Okay, that's kind of half of the answer. Anybody knows what the other half is? That's half of the answer. What's the other half? Self-interest means anything that you're doing for personal benefit, okay? Whether you're an auditor or just any individual. You're doing, for example, if you're getting married just for money and not because you love your spouse, that is a self-interest arrangement. You're only interested in what you are going to get out of it. That's what we mean by self-interest. Okay? So the auditor should never get involved in anything because he's looking after his own self-interest, like making more money from the audit next year, or being able to buy shares in the company, or being able to fly the company's private jet, or whatever the case might be. Anything that he's going to benefit from personally, he should stay away from that. If he doesn't, it will affect his independence and his judgment. Period. That applies to everyone, by the way. It's hard to be independent if you are running self-interest programs, because then you're going to be compromising yourself in order to get what it is you say you want. The auditor is no different. They're not expected to do that. Okay. What about self-review? How is that a threat? Self-review. How do you put those two paragraphs in a way that you can explain self-review? How is that a threat? Anybody take a shot at it?
no, sir.
Yeah, I know it's not straightforward. Basically, self-review is if you go out to do an audit and for some reason somebody has to go behind you to double check what you've done. Okay?
That
Um,
don't sound like that.
and that is oftentimes how it is understood to be. For example, notice it says uh, in a previous assurance engagement or non-assurance engagement needs to be re-evaluated in reaching conclusions on the assurance engagement. That means something was done and then somebody to go back and look at it again for whatever reason.
So you mean to say someone have to double check your work because there's doubt involved?
For whatever reason, of course.
Okay.
Absolutely. Same as in your job. If your supervisor doesn't trust your work because you're careless or you've been involved in something fraudulent or untoward before, then everybody's going to be checking everything you've done. Okay, so this kind of self-review thing that has to occur for any reason it is a huge threat to an auditor's independence and his work because it now has people second guessing, and it's hard to be complete in your work if people are second guessing it. Okay, what about the advocacy threat? What is that? I know that's another tough one. But the advocacy threat is when you have the auditor talking as if he is representing the company rather than his own firm for whatever reason. In other words, he's an advocate for the firm, supporting stuff that the firm's board of directors are talking about rather than being independent and saying, I hear you, but based on my review, I don't agree with you. Okay? And some auditors get caught up with that because they do get bribed. They do get talked into reneging on their independence by gifts and promises and money and all this kind of stuff. And so when that happens, it's just like, for example, you have a best friend. Because they're your best friend, you become an advocate for them. Even when they do things that are wrong, you still try to protect them. Or a family member. Okay, that's what advocacy is like. So the auditor can be an advocate for the firm because of gifts and promises and favors and all that stuff, they start speaking the language of the firm's board rather than the language of the auditor. And that is a threat to the auditor's independence and the proper conduct of an audit, period. Okay. Hopefully that will help you to remember. Okay. The familiarity threat, that's simple. Familiarity breeds what? Anybody knows that expression?
Having knowing someone or just familiar with a certain situation.
Yeah,
Compromise your opinion on a situation.
yeah. The more familiar you are, the harder it is for you to do what? When
Be
it's time-
objective.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why a mother can see her son shoot somebody in cold blood and still say, leave him alone, don't kill him, that's my baby. He didn't mean to do it. Because familiarity, well, that's an extreme example, but it's a true one. But in other cases, if somebody's your friend or you have some kind of relationship that you try to protect or cover for, that kind of familiarity can cause you to lose your judgment, your good judgment, and
So
to
put
lose
that
your
in simple
independence.
terms so I can answer that on the question in 5 words.
Familiarity threat?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, somebody put that in a simple form. Anyone? Let's see if your colleagues can put it in a simpler form. The familiarity threat. Don't be so comfortable with the firm that you allow it to affect your judgment. That's all it is. Okay? And we all know about that in our own lives if we want to be really honest. And so even outside of the auditor, make sure you don't let familiarity cause you to get in trouble. That means you start covering up the wrong that people do just because you like them. They're related to you. They are something to you. And so you cover up, even though you know what they've done is wrong. And sometimes that wrong will land you in prison or dead, which has happened to many people, by the way. Okay? The familiarity threat. Careful with that. And certainly the auditor has to be especially careful. Because depending on what the board of directors are up to in the company, as soon as the auditors reach, they start massaging the auditor to soften them up, get familiar, have lunch every day, have wine every day, have dinner every evening, all kinds of stupid stuff, which the auditor shouldn't do. Because that is creating familiarity. Let's go on the beach, go by the pool. Next thing you know, you go by the pool, have some doggone caviar and chicken wings, and then 7 chicks in bikinis walk out, dive in the pool, swim around, looking on, see, then you become compromised. And suddenly you cannot make a decision anymore in an independent fashion. And then if you try to do it, sometimes these same members of the board will come back and say, if you don't do what we want, we'll report you because we have everything we did on camera or some other ridiculous thing. Okay, that's the familiarity issue. So auditors have to be very careful with that. And then finally, the intimidation threat. That should be easy enough.
Well, that last sentence, what you said, is I thought you would switch to intimidation threat.
Well, that was bordering on intimidation. Okay. The first part of that last sentence was they will use that familiarity that situation to say you're familiar and therefore if you don't do what we want. And then if that part of it spills over into intimidation. Because if you don't do it, then they take action to mess with your reputation and your job. Okay? And so the intimidation threat is the last of the threats, but it's not the least. Auditors are often intimidated that if they don't do what the board wants, the board will not call them back for the next audit. If they know what the board wants, the board will badmouth them to their friends. So their friends' firms will not call them in for an audit. All kinds of crazy stuff people do to intimidate you, intimidate the auditor to get them to do what they want. But despite all of that, the auditor is expected to ignore all of these things, all of these threats, and go on and do his or her work, just like a compliance officer. Despite the threats, you have to ignore them and go on and do the work. Period. However, unfortunately, some people get caught, as always, okay? And that is unfortunate, and that has always been the case. There'll be persons who do it right, and there'll be persons who will get caught in the web. Okay? So, what are the safeguards against these threats? There are 1, 2, 3, 4. The 4 safeguard against these threats. Safeguard number 1. The auditor must remain independent of the client. Simple as that.
Mr. Wilkinson, I'm gonna need you to backtrack for me, please. What you say about intimidation threat
What about it?
in the short term?
What about it?
Give me a sentence, please.
You mean about what the intimidation threat is?
Yeah, I know you just talk a lot around the conversation, but I still like to get things like simple, like I like to take notes.
Oh, well, I mean, the best definition is the one that they gave. It's very straightforward,
Okay,
where they say an intimidation threat occurs when the auditor is what? Deterred. What does deterred mean? Anyone?
confused.
Not confused, but turned away.
All
If
right,
somebody
perturbed.
turning you away, when the auditor is turned away from acting what? Objectively and independently. Okay? Whatever that threat might be. Notice they didn't say give examples of the threat.
I was trying to figure out what could cause the threat.
Well, this is what I'm telling you. The threat will be if you don't do what we flicking say, we won't bring you back next year to make this $10 million next year. That's the threat. So the auditor has to say, then too bad, don't bring me back, but I have to do my job. Or he will succumb or be deterred and say, well, I want to come back next year, so I'll do whatever you say. Does it
Okay,
make
so
sense?
I know what I was trying to get at. I just was trying to figure out if it had been something the auditor would have brought on himself. It's just that the company just discussed it.
Both. The company could be disgusting, but the auditor's job is to do
Okay.
the auditor's job nevertheless.
The ethical thing. Okay,
Correct. Okay? Many board members and senior management are stinky. They'll do anything, kill God on the cross to get you to do what they want. And some of them actually kill people for real, depending on how serious they think it is in the real world, not TV. And whatever the threat might be, the auditor still has to do his or her job appropriately, professionally, ethically. And then when they're done, write the flicking report, close the briefcase, and leave. They don't call them back next year. Too bad. That's the price of being a professional in any capacity, auditing included. How about that? All right. That's the price of being a professional teller. You know what a professional teller is, anyone? A professional teller is a teller that does their job with dignity and independence and pride and confidentiality. The same things with integrity and professionalism. Same thing. So that's only a teller. So what do you mean by only a teller? The tellers are the gatekeepers to the financial institution. They can make or break it. They can take bribes from a money launderer, and every day somebody comes in and make deposits over and above what they should make without any kind of retribution, because they've already bribed the teller, and the teller is taking those deposits so that that money can be deposited into the bank and laundered, cleaned up. So there's no such thing as only a teller. Remember. All right, so safeguard number 1, remain independent. That's the first thing. Safeguard number 2. Anybody figured it out? Well, safeguard number 2 eventually says,
If I just refuse a job from the company,
absolutely,
Yeah.
thank you very much. Now you guys are even being able to figure out what to pull out of the paragraph. That's exactly right. Be able to refuse if necessary. That's the next safeguard. And once you refuse, you don't have to worry about a bloody thing. Okay? I've had some young guys on many occasions try to trip me up. So Wilkinson, what do you do if you see a girl in a mini? I said, what do you do with the Bible? Say you flee, run. They laugh at me. So what do you mean run? They're on mini, sir? I know that's the whole idea. If you don't want to get stuck, you have to run. Just like the auditor, you don't want to get stuck, don't take the engagement. And if you don't take the engagement, they can't tell you anything because you're not there. True or false? Hello?
true, I think it's beyond move.
Okay. Safeguard number 3, what is that?
Always do what is best in the public interest.
Always do what is best in the public interest.
That means whatever you do behind the scenes, if it come to the public, let it be in the best interest so you don't look bad, I guess.
Well, even behind the scenes, you have to do the right thing so it doesn't come to the public as being bad. That's the
That's
whole
what I'm
point.
saying. So even if something comes up, it won't to the public. That's where integrity comes in, I guess.
Yeah, whatever you do it in the public's interest. That's it. So that nobody is unduly hurt and affected by your actions. And what about number 4? What's the 4th safeguard?
I don't know what independence and the thing I'm in, but I guess should always remember down above 3 safeguards.
The 4th one seems a little weird.
Dependence and the parents.
Yeah, what do you think that means? Anyone? It is also important to note that the adoption of certain safeguards may not address independence in the parents. In other words, you might take on a particular safeguard that you think kind of protects you. And in doing that, it may not appear as if you're being independent in your actions. Now, an example of that would have to be a case in point that you have to identify when it comes up. But the important thing to remember is that sometimes certain safeguards might not give the appearance that you're being independent. That's really the key. Okay? And that's all you need to know at this point. So those are the 4 safeguards. And any auditor who is threatened by any of the 5 threats, what are the 5 threats again, anyone?
Self-interest, self-review, advocacy, intimidation, and I think one more, I can't remember.
Excellent. If you remember 4 out of 5, you're way ahead of the game.
Familiarity.
Yes, and a simple explanation for each one doubles your points. Just like that. That's what I'm saying. And that's the same principle you apply to all of your modules. The only problem is for a lot of students is taking the time to do it. People get antsy. They don't want to be stuck to no table for hours and hours. But if you're going to be a good student and get great results, that's what you have to do. I'm sorry. There is no magic. Now you can do a little bit and maybe scrape by or not, If you want to do well, you have to sit to that table and for hours. And when you get stiff, stand up and walk around, take a break for an hour, watch a movie, then go back again for hours. Then take a break, eat, snooze, get a power nap, then go back for hours. Whatever you need to do. And that will vary depending on each person, but that's what you have to do if you want to do well. Okay? All right, good stuff, good stuff. So that's the IFAC code. Now, the other code that I want you to be aware of is the ICAEW code. I'm hoping that somebody's been proactive and looked up ICAEW. Anybody did that? I'm looking that up before we get to it.
Okay, Mr. Wilson,
Yeah.
right? So a quick question, right?
Mhm.
We said originally that there were 2 codes of professional ethics. Now
Right.
we going into how many codes? Because we say IFAC, and I thought the next one was supposed to be AICPA.
Uh-huh.
So what category would this particular ICAEW code go into?
Yeah, that's a good question. This particular category would fall under the category with the IACPA. And the reason I say that because the codes that we're looking at now are equivalents of the AICPA. They just put for professional bodies in different countries, but they are equivalent to the American AICPA. Okay, so for in all intents and purposes, these codes can all be grouped within the AICPA codes. Okay, so the 2 key codes are still IFAC and AICPA, and then these other babies that fall in between, they are part of the AICPA because they have similar, they're very similar in nature, okay, in terms of the different jurisdictions which they represent. All right. Okay. It's a good question. Folks are thinking way out of the box in the final stretches. I like that. That means when you get back to work after all this crap, you're not going to be the same anymore. You're going to be a little more critical, a little more curious, a little more checking, a little more like, excuse me, and stuff like that. And really, that's also part of the program, separate apart from persons who might be doing any form of auditing at the moment. Remember, you're doing an fundamentals of auditing, not because you might just be an internal auditor, but also because you want to find out how the world of audit affects you. And that's very important. Every employee should know. I've been telling firms forever, house sessions, hub training sessions, if only for 2 or 3 hours for your staff so that they can understand the nature of the auditing process. Because the auditing process that you guys have been studying, it should be an eye opener to a lot of things that may be going on in your firm that you may not even have contemplated before as an employee. Okay, very important stuff. So you can be guided by how you do your work. You can be guided by how the work around you is being done. If you're supervising, be guided by how your subordinates are doing their work. Because now you know when the auditors come in, what's going to happen, so to speak. And so it is supposed to help you to be more alert, more competent, and certainly more objective even in the way you do your work and the way you supervise people, etc. That's the great thing about this kind of information. Right? It's supposed to get you to think out of the box, just like she just did. She said, okay, fine. So doggone AICPA is the other one. Who the hell is the AIE? Where did they come from? Okay, good stuff. All right, anybody look it up? ICAEW?
Yeah, that's the Institute of Chartered Accountants, England and Wales.
Yes, Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales. For those of you who didn't know, the American Association of Certified Public Accountants, the ICPA, is the American professional body of accountants and auditors. However, originally there was no America. Believe it or not, other than the Indians who were in North America, the original settlers in North America were British, by the way. They became the new settlers of North America, that we know as Canada and the United States these days. And a lot of the accounting practices in Canada and the United States, they got from the British people who landed there originally, called the Quakers on their little ships and brought over their this and that, the information, the knowledge, etc. Okay, so that's why we refer to England as the motherland for Caribbean countries like ours, and for the United States and Canada and countries that have been founded by the British. So the AICEW, of course, is the old British equivalent. There are some other British equivalents to the American AICPA, but they all pretty much adhere to the same standards. And that's primarily why it's here. So you can kind of see the different perspectives from the AICPA side, so to speak. Okay. So, man, I've been talking all that time. No way. That's too much talking. I need a volunteer. Is Karen in the room yet? If she is, if she's not answering.
Hi, Mr. Wilkerson.
Oh, Karen, you are in the room. Wonderful. So let me ask you, Karen, did you hear my little speech about the makeup examination?
When last class?
This class.
No.
My. Well, it's a good thing you answered. I was telling the students that those students who got the midterm examination done by the deadline, they
Mhm.
would get X credit for their efforts. Those who did not meet the deadline, if you are interested, you have until tomorrow night at 12 o'clock to do it. You will not get the same credit as the others who met the deadline, but you will get some credit if you do it.
Okay, awesome.
Okay? So
Okay.
yeah, it's up to those persons if they want to do it or not. If you want that extra credit, I encourage you to find some time between now and tomorrow to go ahead and do that and send me an email before midnight tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay?
Yes.
By all means. Okay, fantastic. So good stuff. I'm glad you answered so I could bring you up to date on that. Don't forget, for those who may not have been in the room, your final exam is next week. Does anybody remember what time the midterm exam started?
6:30.
Yeah, but that got 6 o'clock, that's too late.
Yeah, the 6, yeah.
Well, what time did it start the last time?
6:30.
6:30, but we always waiting there before, before 6.
You were waiting until when?
We all were there. A lot of us were there before 6.
So you would prefer to start at 6 o'clock?
Yes.
Yeah,
Is that a consensus for everyone in the room or majority rules?
What time they want to do it for?
6 o'clock.
Oh, yeah, that's fine.
So we're in agreement, 6 o'clock?
Yes.
Okay, I'll send a note when I'm done and tell them to please start the exam at 6 o'clock. That means you have to be there before 6 o'clock. Okay? Don't read 6:15 and say we may as well start at 6:30 because it might already be in progress. So I'm going to send the note and say 6 to 9 this time. We have an agreement on that. Okay? Okay. So now I need somebody. Who did not read the last time? I don't hear anything from India. I wonder if India is in the room. Tied up at that bloody bank, probably. All right, who feels like reading? Let me see if I can get a volunteer first. Who feels like reading?
I'll go.
Okay, you said that a little slowly, Ebony, but I'll take that.
Yes, I'll
Sure.
go.
Okay. Well,
All
why
right.
don't you begin with the AIACEW code, and let's see what's happening in the in that particular part of England and Wales.
All right. ICAEW's Code of Ethics applies to all members, students, affiliates, employees of member firms, and where applicable, member firms in all of their professional and business activities, whether remunerated or voluntary. This is influenced by the guidance of IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, of which the ICAEW is a member. The ICAEW code states that professional accountants are expected to follow the guidance contained in the fundamental principles in all of their professional and business activities, whether carried out with or without reward, and in other circumstances where to fail to do so would bring discredit to the profession. Code has been derived from the International Ethics Standards Board of Accountants Code of Ethics issued on July 2009 by the International Federation of Accountants. Accordingly, compliance with the remainder of this code will ensure compliance with the principles of IESBA. I feel like there's a bunch of code tongue twisting.
Yeah, it is, and I'm glad you said that. I'm just having you, I'm not going to harass you with all this crazy affiliations and bodies and so on. That's really not critical at this stage of the game. I'm just walking you through this part of it quickly so that you can get a feel that these things are all interconnected and all the crappy stuff, not crappy, but you know what I mean, that goes into making this whole thing work. So when you see your auditor walk in, they're not just walking in out of thin air. All kinds of things around the world govern their behavior and govern the things that are done. Okay. Notice, by the way, that the ICAEW is a member of IFAC, as is other professional bodies. So IFAC all of a sudden appears to be the standard bearer, of which many of these other professional bodies are members. Okay. Out of IFAC came many. Okay. Including, no doubt, the AICPA. Okay, keep going.
Paragraph numbering in the rest of this code replicates that used in the IESBA Code of Ethics, except in respect of sections 221, 241, and Part D, which have no direct equivalent in the IESBA Code of Ethics. ICAEW's Code of Ethics in place to 31st December 2010 replaced ICAEW's Guide to Professional Ethics on 1st of September 2006. A revised Code of Ethics applies from the 1st of January 2011. The substance of this code is the same as our previous Guide to Professional Ethics, but the layout and structure of the new code are more user-friendly. ICAEW code implements that IFAC code above so that following it ensures compliance with the IFAC code.
Now, interesting enough, before you go on, Ebony, please don't get bogged down in those few paragraphs. I'm not going to ask you questions on those. I just wanted you to see how seriously they take this coding information. This thing is so formalized, it's ridiculous. Paragraph, subcodes, this date, that date, the other date, update, updates. This thing is very serious business as far as they're concerned. And those persons who are practicing the accounting and auditing profession are expected to be guided by this stuff or suffer the consequences. And in some cases, if you go too far in terms of being unethical, you can actually lose your license to practice, which is a big problem for practicing accountants and auditors. Okay. All right, now we get into the nitty-gritty. Okay, Ebony.
The 5 fundamental principles of ICAEW code: integrity. A professional accountant should be straightforward and honest in all professional and business relationships. Objectivity. A professional accountant should not allow bias, conflict, or interest, or undue influence of others to override professional and business judgments. Professional competence and due care. A professional accountant has a continuing duty to maintain professional knowledge and skill at the level required to ensure that a client or employer receives competent professional services based on current developments in practice, legislation, and techniques. Professional accountants should act diligently and by applicable technical and professional standards. Confidentiality. A professional accountant should respect the confidentiality of information acquired as a result of a professional and business relationship and should not disclose any such information to third parties without proper and specific authority unless there is a legal or professional right or duty to disclose. Confidential information acquired as a result of professional and business relationships should not be used for the personal advantage of the professional accounting or third parties. Professional behavior, a professional accountant should comply with relevant laws and regulations and should avoid any action that discredits the profession.
Before you go on, Ebony, I hope you guys noticed that the
It's the same thing.
yeah, it's very similar, if not the same, as what we saw earlier on the
IFAC,
yeah, IFAC. And so ICAEW pretty much adopted exactly the same codes that IFAC has adopted. Okay, and you'll see that to be a trend with some differences along the way. So by learning the IFAC codes, you automatically learn the ICAEW codes. Okay, the 5 items and what they are, they're exactly pretty much the same. Okay, so now we go to the APB ethical standard. What does APB mean, by the way? For the police, it means all points bulletin, but for the
I just
accountant,
want to say that's what the police is full for.
what does it mean for the accountant auditor?
Audit and practicing board. Practices,
Audit, say it again.
audit and practices board.
Auditing practices board, ethical standards. Okay, Ebony, let's go.
sorry, you want me to go now?
Yep, you can go.
Sorry. APB ethical standards. UK auditors are also subject to APB's ethical standards. The APB is the Auditing Practices Board in the UK, which also issues auditing standards adopted by IFAC, which creates them. APB have issued ethical standards with which UK auditors must comply when carrying out UK audits. They are as follows. 1, integrity, objectivity, and independence. 2, financial, business, employment, and personal relationships. 3, long association with the audit engagement. 4, fees, remuneration, and evaluation policies, litigation, gifts, and hospitality. 5, non-audit services provided to audit clients.
Now, before she goes on,
Pardon?
before you go on, let me just say that those 5 auditing principles, standards, please, you don't have to learn them word for word. If you remember 1 or 2 of them from each point, you're well on your way. But pretty much they are designed to give us an indication of how we are to be practicing our ethics, whether it's in business, in association with companies and persons, how we charge our fees, don't overcharge our clients, and all this kind of stuff. And even in providing what we call non-audit services, make sure that we're doing stuff ethically and that we're not overriding our authority to get things done. For example, if you're a dentist, you're a doctor, but you're not a doctor who does other things. So if somebody breaks their arm, you say, I'll fix it because I'm a doctor, but in fact, you're a dentist, you're misrepresenting. That is unethical and dangerous and a problem for the person whose arm needs to be fixed. Okay? And so these auditing principles, board standards, again, just like the IEC, ECW, and all coming out of IFAC, are designed to protect the auditor's interests and the interests of the clients and the interests of all the other stakeholders, which includes employees, government, investors, bankers, everybody. Because when the audit goes wrong, everything goes wrong, unfortunately.
So you want us to remember all that to make no sense? Anything dealing with the UK company there.
No, all of what? Which ones?
The 5 APB ethical standards.
Oh, they make a whole lot of sense. The one I don't want you to remember is that stuff that she was reading earlier. You don't need to remember all the subsections and when they were renewed and updated. All right, I just walk you through that to show you how serious they are about what they do. But these 5 standards, yes. Now, I'm not saying you should remember them word for word. If you're one of those who can do that, let it rip. But if you're not, just remember it how best you remember it. And how best do you remember? You have to study it. I know it stinks. Okay, but that is what's.
I don't know how you want us to answer question, go to work and sleep. When our brain, it's like we could crash.
No, no, you're not.
5, you like that number 5 and 6.
What you have to do,
I got by that number after this exam.
what you have to do is when you come from work, go to sleep and get up at 1 o'clock every night. So you get 5 or 6
Do that
hours.
by yourself, Mr. Richardson. I can't do that with a young 1-year-old. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you have a unique situation. Yeah,
The stresses of the day ain't like the stresses back in the day. It's different. The traffic alone is mentally draining.
so,
To have to when you come home and you have to think of going in that traffic in the morning.
yeah, I know. Being a part-time student is very, very difficult work. There's no I always take my hats off as a former part-time student who did most of my studies as a working person. I really do get it. It's very difficult. Okay. You have to almost do some Herculean, crazy, schizophrenic, stupid stuff to survive, especially if you want to do well. If you want to get by, you don't have to do that much. But if you want to do well, it's mind-boggling. Okay. All right. So those 5 APB standards, you want to be able to remember some version of them. Even if you only remember one from each one, that will help you. For example, if going down the list, if you remember integrity, financial, association, remuneration, and non-audit services. See how simple I said that? That's how simple your notes can be. And that's how easy it is to get additional points if a question comes up, just like that. But you have to put in the work to do that first. And that's hours and hours sitting to a table, setting it up. And then after that, you plan your study schedule and you go for it every day until exam time. All right, keep going, Ebony.
There is also an ES with provisions available for smaller entities, which is not examinable. This offers exemptions and special rules to the auditors of smaller entities. These standards were developed about the AFCA code of ethics and also the EC recommendation on the independence of statutory audits.
Okay. Now we get to the ICPA.
AICPA Code of Professional Conduct. The Code of Professional Conduct of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants consists of 2 sections, the principles and the rules. The principles provide the framework for the rules which govern the performance of professional services by members. The Council of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants is authorized to designate bodies to promulgate
Yeah, promulgate. That's a little tongue.
promulgate technical standards under the rules and the bylaws required adherence to those rules and standards. A few definitions taken from the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct must be understood to minimize misinterpretations of the rules. Client, any person or entity other than the member's employer engages a member or member's firm to perform professional service, or a person or entity concerning which professional services are performed. Firm, a form of the organization permitted by law or regulation whose characteristics conform to resolution of the Council of the AICPA and that is engaged in public practice. Institute, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Member, a member, associate member, or international associate of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Public practice. The public practice consists of the performance of professional services for a client by a member or member firms.
Of course, these are all just definitions to give you a little feel and a little insight for the language of the auditor from an AICPA perspective. But of course, auditing principles are pretty much the same with some exceptions around the world. Well, not around the world, certainly around the Western world. God knows what the Eastern world is doing. Nobody ever really knows what the Eastern world is doing. But as far as the Western world is concerned, the principles and practices are pretty much the same. Some of the language is a little different, but at the end of the day, the objectives are the same. So this is just some of the language of the auditor in case you run into it in general or even in our discussions this evening. Okay, the principles.
The principles. The The principles of Code of Professional Conduct of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants express the profession's recognition of its responsibilities to the public, to clients, and colleagues. These are as follows. AICPA Code of Professional Conduct. Responsibilities, 1, 2, the public interest, 3, integrity, 4, objectivity and independence, 5, due care, 6, scope and nature of services.
Which is a little different from what we saw a little earlier, but in essence, pretty much the same in most respects. A little change of language, but in terms of public interest, integrity, objectivity, pretty much what we saw with the other organizations and their codes. This is just the American version, and of course, the Americans will have a little more of something for their own purposes. Okay, so these are the American principles that govern their code of conduct in the profession in the United States, as is the IACW in the UK, and so on. And of course, IFAC is the mother of it all, because most of these, if not all of these things, have come out of IFAC in one form or another. Okay, so by definition, keep going, Ebony.
Responsibilities. In carrying out their responsibilities as professionals, members should exercise sensitive professional and moral judgments in all their activities. B, the public interest. Members should accept the obligation to act in a way that will serve the public interest, honor the public trust, and demonstrate a commitment of professionalism. Integrity. To maintain and broaden public confidence, members should perform all professional responsibilities with the highest sense of integrity. Objectivity. Objectivity and independence. A member should maintain objectivity and be free of conflicts of interest and in discharging professional responsibilities. A member in public public practice should be independent in fact and appearance when providing auditing and other help me out here. Other attestation services.
Yeah,
You can-
attestation services are what we refer to as auditing services, which basically means when an auditor comes in and conducts an audit, what they're doing is getting ready to make an attestation or a test, or to confirm or verify whether your accounts represent a true and fair view according to generally accepted accounting principles. Okay, so their attestation or their declaration can be either positive or negative, depending on what's going on in your organization. So if you ever hear that word again, you know that's the auditor who will make a declaration as to whether you pass the audit or fail the audit. Okay, attestation, the declaration made by the auditor regarding whether your audit was successful or not. Okay, all right, keep going.
Due care. A member should observe the profession's technical and ethical standards, strive continually to improve competence and the quality of services, and discharge professional responsibility to the best of the member's ability. Scope and nature of services. A member in public practice should observe the principles of the Code of Professional Conduct in determining the scope and nature of services provided. 2, rules.
Before she goes on, I'm sure you guys can see the similarities in the descriptions, even though some of the topical codes are a little bit different under the APB and the ICW and the other, I think it's an IFAC. The actual breakdown of the description in many cases are very, very similar. So you shouldn't really have any problems trying to not only understand them, but to break them out in the separate categories. So you should know by now that I can only, and I'll probably only ask you questions on the code, what are the codes, and describe the codes under the IFAC, IACW, APB codes, and now the AICPA. There's no magic about it. So basically, you pretty much know what you have to prepare for this particular module. And all you need to do now is go back between whenever you do it and just make your little notes along the way. Keep them simple so you can study them with the greatest degree of comfort, and it should get you ready if you do that for each module. Okay, Ebony, keep going.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, one more thing. So what you're saying is the ACAEW code and the APB code isn't necessarily something that you would say would probably show up on the test, just the ACPA and the IFAC.
No, what you can expect to show up would be IFAC, AACW, ICAEW, the 5 APB audit codes, and then AICPA codes. But again, except for the APB codes, the rest of them are very similar. So they shouldn't stress you too much. Okay. I encourage you just to make sure you have the proper heading, you write down the codes correctly, and the description for each one, you make it simple for each code category. And if you do that, then you start studying it, you should be fine. Okay. Just don't get bogged down in all the details again, because we already had that discussion, reading, talk about, and so on. Okay? I'm not going to bog you down in the details again. I just want you to understand the fundamentals, okay? So that you can be secure in those basic hardcore concepts that you can actually carry with you and use if necessary. If you need to get into the details, you can always pull out your notes and have a look. Okay? All right, keep going.
The rules of conduct. The second section of the AICPA's Code of Professional Conduct consists of 11 enforceable rules as listed below. Rule 101, independence. A member in public practice should be independent in the performance of professional services as required by standards promulgated by bodies designated by council. In performing an test engagement, a member should consult the rules of his or her state board of accountancy, his or her state CPA society, the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board, and the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission if the member's report will be filed with the SEC, the U.S. Department of Labor, if the member's report will be filed with the DOL, the Government Accountability Office, if law, regulation, agreement, policy, or contract requires the member's report to be filed under GAO regulations, and any organization that issues or enforces standards of independence that would apply to the members' engagement.
Let me say this before Ebony goes on. I'm not going to label you with all those acronyms of the various government departments in the United States, many of which we have equivalents here in the Bahamas as well, that are responsible for regulating the activities of financial institutions, audit firms, etc. What I want you to know is that rule number 101, the first of 11, requires that an auditor is independent. That's what I really want you to remember. Okay? This other stuff, don't get bogged down in it. That's why I'm bogging you down in it now. And you can get bogged down in it when you finish your examination. If you feel a little froggy and you want to know what the hell is SEC? Okay? DOL. These are all acronyms. Yes. Anybody knows what SEC is, by the way? It's okay. It's a lot of stuff. Okay, Securities and Exchange Commission, DOL, Department of Labor, and the list goes on and on and on. So I don't want you to get too bogged down in this and that part of it. I just want you to know that rule number 1 on the AICPA, enforcement rules happens to be the auditor must be independent. And you know that from previous discussions anyway. Now it's back again in our discussion with the AICPA. So what I'm saying is a lot of this stuff is kind of overlapping for the various organizations for obvious reasons. Okay, keep going.
Such organizations may have independence requirements or rulings that differ from those of the AICPA. Independence shall be considered to be impaired if A, during the period of the professional engagement, a covered member, 1, had or was permitted to acquire any direct or material indirect financial interest in the client. 2, was a trustee, any trust or executor or administrator of any estate, if such trust or estate had or was committed to acquire any direct or material indirect financial interest in the client. And the covered member, individually or with others, have the authority to make investment decisions for the trust or estate, or the trust or estate owned or was committed to acquire more than 10% of the client's outstanding equity securities or other ownership interests, or the value of the trust or estates holding in the client exceeds 10% of the total assets of the trust or estate. 3, had a joint closely held investment that was material to the covered member. 4, except as specifically permitted in the interpretation
Interpretation.
of 101 through 5, at any loan to or from the client, any officer or director of the client, or in any individual owning 10% or more of the client's outstanding equity, securities, or other ownership interests.
Now, before she goes on, let me say this. See all that stuff in A? All that means is, under rule number 1, the auditor is expected to be independent. We know that. And then we're saying the auditor will not be independent if any of these things she ran through apply. And in a nutshell, all of them simply means this: the auditor is not expected to get involved in any financial, personal, social, or any other of the affairs of the company or its activities whatsoever. That's what all this mumbo jumbo means. So without even understanding the trusteeships, the 10% interest, the equity interest, and all that stuff, perhaps the important thing to remember, the auditor must stay away from any financial, personal, or other interest in the firm in which it's auditing. Because once you start getting involved with them, it's hard to maintain your independence anymore. It's quite as simple as that. Okay? It's like in the real world, for example, if let's say a boss has a secretary, he can maintain his independence with his secretary as long as he behaves ethically with his secretary. The moment he starts to do anything unethically, like grab her butt or something, then he loses all independence and funny things start to happen and the whole relationship collapses. The same principle applies with the auditor. If the auditor gets involved in any of the affairs of the firm, it takes away its independence. He cannot think clearly anymore. He cannot stand alone and aside and away from the problem and make a proper assessment, because now he's tied up in some form or another in it. So no lunches, no dinners, no trips, no hotels, no payoffs, no gifts, no nothing is what the auditors should be doing when they go into the firm. Just audit, be polite, be professional, and get the hell out. How about that? Of course, making sure to complete his audit report and submitting it to the board of directors. That's what the auditor is supposed to do. Anything else that falls in any of these categories or anything else that ties the auditor up in any of the affairs of the business in any form or fashion, or any of its boards members and employees of any kind, etc., even shareholders, then the auditor starts getting compromised, cannot do his job properly, and eventually things can get a bit stinky. Okay, keep going.
During the period of the professional engagement, a partner or professional employee of the firm, his or her immediate family, or any group of such persons acting together owns more than 5% of a client's outstanding equity, securities, or other ownership interests. C, during the period covered by the financial statements during the period of the professional engagement, a firm or partner or professional employee of the firm was simultaneously associated with the client as a one director, officer, or employee, draw in any capacity equivalent to that of a member of management. 2, the promoter, underwriter, or voting trustee, or 3, trustee for any pension or profit sharing trust of the client.
In other words, stay out of the affairs of that bloody company that you're auditing. Quite simple. We're just going into a little detail to kind of warm things up and introduce you to some of the language of the business world. Okay? And I wouldn't advise you guys to be too concerned about the details of it. because a lot of this stuff is a whole set of learning elsewhere, like trusteeships and equities and all this kind of securities and markets and so on. The important thing to remember out of all of this, along with whatever you might remember, is that you're an auditor, stay away from the affairs of the company. Don't get involved with it in any form or fashion. Okay? So all of that comes out of rule number 1 for the ICPA. To remain independent, don't do any of that. What does any of that mean? Don't stay away out of the affairs of the company. Do your audit, go back to your firm, and get on with your life until next year. Any auditor who does that does well. Any auditor who does not do it and gets caught up in any of those things she talked about or anything else can put themselves and their firms and the firm they're auditing, by the way, in jeopardy. All right. Keep going, Ebony.
Rule 102, integrity and objectivity. In the performance of any professional service, a member shall maintain objectivity and integrity, shall be free of conflicts of interest, and shall not knowingly misrepresent facts or subordinate his or her judgment to others. A member shall be considered to have knowingly misrepresented facts in violation of Rule 102 when he or she knowingly, 1, makes or permits or directs another to make materially false and misleading entries and in an entity's financial statements or records. 2, fails to correct the entity's financial statements or records that are materially false and misleading when he or she has the authority to record an entry. Or 3, signs of permits or directs another to sign a document containing materially false and misleading information. Sorry, I may have to stop here because the baby is getting antsy.
No problem, Ebony. You've done an amazing job. Thank you very much. I don't know how you got this far with the little sweetie pie egging you up. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Anybody wants to finish the race for Ebony? We only have a little more to go. A volunteer. If Ebony can do it, anyone can do it.
My baby Yancy too, Mr. Wilkinson. I'm not gonna lie. He's making the most noise, but yeah.
Okay, Karen, are you there? Karen has run off from Martini already.
I right here.
Okay,
Hold on,
Karen.
hold Oh Lord, like family talking in the background. Hold on.
Okay, that's okay. You don't have much to go, only a little bit.
Okay, hold on, give me 1 second. Hold on, wait, where we stop?
Rule 201, general standards. That's where we are.
General standards. Oh, wait.
Yeah, rule 201, general standards.
Hold on 1 second. Okay, I see it.
Okay. Let him rip.
Okay. Hold on, wait.
A member shall.
Okay, I doing it right now. Okay. A member shall comply with the following standards and with any interpretations thereof by bodies designated by council. Professional competence, undertake only those professional services that the member or the member's firm can reasonably expect to be completed with professional competence. Due professional care, exercise due professional care in the performance of professional services. Planning and supervision, adequately plan and supervise the performance of professional services. Hey, go ahead. Sufficient relevant data, obtain sufficient relevant data to afford a reasonable basis for conclusions or recommendations about any professional services performed. A member's agreement to perform professional services implies that the member has the necessary competence to complete those professional services according to professional standards, applying his or her knowledge and skill with reasonable care and diligence. but the member does not assume responsibility for the infallibility
Yeah,
of knowledge or judgment.
good. Keep going.
Competence to perform professional services involves both the technical qualifications of the member and the member's staff and the ability to supervise and evaluate the quality of the work performed. Competence relates both to a knowledge of the profession standards, techniques, and the technical subject matter involved, and to the compatibility to exercise sound judgment in applying such knowledge in the performance of professional services. The member may have the knowledge required to complete the services by professional standards before a performance. In some cases, however, additional research or consultation will with others may be necessary during the performance of the professional services. This does not ordinarily represent a lack of competence, but rather is a normal part of the performance of professional services. However, if a member is unable to gain sufficient competence to these means, the member should suggest, in fairness to the client and the public, the engagement of someone competent to perform the needed professional service, either independently or as an associate.
Thank you very much, Karen. And that is where we're going to stop. I'm not going to hold you responsible for anything beyond that point because it's pretty much more of what we've already talked about. The only thing you're going to be responsible for is from the beginning of the module right up to this point. So please make a note of that so you don't spend valuable time going beyond that point. Let me just say under Rule 201, the general standards, there are 4 of them. I expect that you will learn those 4 general standards under the rules of conduct. They are the professional competence of the auditor, that the auditor must remain professional and competent at all times with regards to completing a job. If you don't think you have the ability to do it, don't take it just because of the money, mess it up, and try to get out of it with some big lie or cover up. Happens too often. It is not expected to happen from a professional, and in this case, a professional auditor. Due professional care, that is a standard requirement. Whatever you decide to do, you have to act in good faith and in the interest of your client, always doing that which is going to put your client in the best possible position, even if it might put you as the professional in an awkward or disadvantaged position. Your client's position must come first. Planning and supervision must be complete and adequate because that's the only way you're going to successfully get through the audit and not put your client's position in jeopardy by not planning the audit correctly. And certainly the last is not the least. Okay, make sure you have sufficient data, sufficient relevant data, not just information, but gather information from your client that will allow you to put everything together and come up with a conclusion that those financial statements are true and fair, and that based on all the things that you've checked, that basically that company is doing all the things that they should do. Does that mean that everything will be perfect? Certainly not. But the idea is to try to ensure that the data is such and sufficient that you can make the statement that things are basically in order, give or take a couple of immaterial issues that the auditor might come across along the way. Okay, so these 4 are absolutely important to understanding the issue of the general standards of auditing by the AICPA. Okay. All right. Any questions? Notice in the paragraphs that follow those 4, there's a little discussion about, hey, get out there and do a great job. If you don't know something, find somebody who does. Don't pretend. Do not pretend. Professionals are not expected to do that. If you don't bloody know, find somebody who does know. Simple as that. And if you get into the engagement to a point and you feel you can't finish, don't fake it. Go to your client and say, unfortunately, I don't have the information, the competent resources, whatever the case might be, to complete this particular audit or process. And so I will resign. my engagement with you so that you can find somebody who is capable. And if you know somebody who's capable, feel free to recommend such a company or a person or entity who can then pick it up from you and complete the job that you know that you could not complete. Whatever you do, professionals should not fake it. That's the worst thing ever, even though many professionals do, because they don't want other people to know sometimes that they don't know. But it's better to do that, get out early, let somebody else finish it, than to pretend and mess things up so badly that you not only mess up yourself, your reputation, but also the firm that you are engaged with. Okay? Something very important to keep in mind, not only from the auditor's perspective, but certainly in general from your own day to day. All right. Any questions before we break? You get to go a little bit earlier tonight. I hope that you'll use that time to make notes while they're fresh in your mind before you finally drop dead and fall asleep. Tonight, remember the techniques that I've given you in terms of note preparation and study. Remember, I said the key is doing it over and over as often as you can if you want to be fairly successful in your results. Okay. Remember,
Sorry,
yeah.
my baby throw my notes on the ground just now. Where was the last piece that we stopped just now? And my page is in order. I don't have it.
We stopped on page 12.
I don't have pages because I printed off.
Oh, you don't have the pages.
No,
Okay.
I don't have the page numbers. I don't have page numbers on it when I print.
Okay. We stopped at rule 201, general standards.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thanks.
And that goes all the way down to an associate. Do not go on to rule 202. We stop at rule 201. Okay?
Okay.
Any other questions?
Just email us some tips, Mr. Wilkinson.
Some tips on top of the tips?
Some tips on exams. What we got, man?
I was doing that all night. You want me to send some more tips on those?
Yes, sir. Oh, yeah.
Let me say this, if you get stuck anywhere along the way, you know how to find me. You have my email and you have my text. Feel free to raise a question if you get stuck on any particular area of concern.
How many topics is this? 4 or 5?
How many topics, class?
Yeah, I know.
How many topics, class? My. Nobody knows how many
From
modules?
I know from internal controls.
So that's like 5 or like 4.5.
Yeah, it's, somebody said it's like 5. Okay. Yeah, it's 5 modules. The only difference is the last module stops at 201.
Practical
Okay.
application. When we do that one,
When?
audit fundamental. We do that last week. Eh?
Yes.
So when
So
we
you
do
did?
vouching. Yeah, I read.
When did we do vouching?
I don't know.
The week before.
So we do 2 and 1 last week. Eh?
No, we didn't. The first thing we did after midterm was internal controls, followed by vouching, followed by verification, followed by practical applications, and then ethics tonight.
Oh, see. Like, see, I write some stuff down with verification and valuation.
Okay, those are the 5 modules that you have to prepare for.
So we have to learn valuation and verification.
Yes.
I see I write some stuff down with that today.
Good. What you may not be aware of is just by being exposed to all this crazy stuff, you're not going to ever be the same again.
But verification is auditor y'all and valuation is from manager side, okay?
Did you guys get that?
Yeah.
Sorry, say it again. I missed that.
Let's say it again.
Verification have a lot to do with auditing and then valuation have to do a lot with management.
Now, she knows what she means. The question is, do the other students know what you mean, Gretchen? Because you're right.
I studied that today.
Very good.
I do nothing to work today.
In fact, you shouldn't do anything at work until next week,
Obvious.
so to speak, because they're gonna benefit from your efforts anyway. So you have the advantage that some other people may not have. You could take a break from.
Oh, no, I don't. Everybody just say was in an office. I get lucky.
Oh, you got lucky today.
Yeah.
Okay.
And y'all remember to learn all evaluation of access.
All right. So yeah, remember what I told you. Make your notes.
And it
Study.
has 5 access. Y'all know everything is being 5s.
Correction. Threes and fives.
Oh, boy.
Threes and fives.
Mr. Wilkinson, who take it personal. You was talk like you ain't easy, but you hard. You hard.
Students have said that to me on more than one occasion. But the heart is not intentional. It's just to make you the best that you can be. Interestingly enough, I ran into one of my students from 30 years ago. He is now the president of one of the local colleges in Nassau. And we were talking, he said, Mr. Wilkinson, he still calls me professor. He says, Professor Wilkinson, do you remember you gave me a C for that accounting class 30 years ago? I said, yes, I remember. What was interesting about, he said, you ready to change it to a B yet? I said, if you insist. So he was really like all bent out of shape back then that he got a C instead of a B. But that's okay. He's turned out to be, Carlton has turned out to be an excellent professional, just like the rest of you are and will be.
At least
Don't
I
worry
know
about it.
at least I know I get 10 points. It's I ain't miss a class. I needed my 10 points. You get a point of class, eh?
Absolutely. The attending class is more important than students think. See, when you attend class, you are not just attending class for the hell of it. The whole environment of listening, the brain is a very amazing thing. Even though you may not be focusing all the time, your brain is. And stuff is going in there, whether you like it or not. And the only way you can get in there if you are present. And that's the importance of getting to class, not just getting the points. The points will help you, but being present is a very important part of the process, whether you are aware of it or not.
Mr. Wilkinson, I was sick that last class, so I hope that don't cause me to mess up my points, because I couldn't make it, I ain't gonna lie. I don't feel too bad.
No, I won't hold that against you. That's not your fault. Okay? A student who has attended 11 out of 12, 9 out of 10, and not attend one because of a situation, by all means, that will not be held against you. Okay, for sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Fantastic. If you think of any along the way, you are free to contact me at any time. I'm always checking email and whatever text I have coming in. I'll be happy to respond if you get stuck anywhere and feel you need to ask a question. Other than that,
Mr. Wilk,
yes.
as for the case study, when did you want us to email the case study printed out when we come into class on Thursday, or what is it that you wanted us to do exactly?
Please
I try to finish
email
it
it.
next
Yeah,
weekend.
email it to me.
And this need to be emailed by when?
Who knows by when?
Next week Thursday.
Next week Thursday, right?
By
Before
the last-
class,
By the last day of class.
or 12 p.m. 12
If you
midnight.
need to wait if you need to wait until 12 midnight for some strange reason, that's fine. I won't hold it against you. As long as you get it in by the witching hour, 12 midnight. Okay, of course.
So let's say for some strange reason I turn in my work and it's not worth the full 10%. Let's just say, would you at any point say, well, oh no, this far off, or when we turn it in, it's when we turn it in, we get a grade based on that?
You mean like, do you have an opportunity to fix something and then resubmit it?
Yeah.
No, sorry. Once you
Ah,
submit
Mr. Wilkinson.
once you
He said
submit it,
no.
Once you submit it, dog eat your lunch. That's it. All right. So make sure you complete it as best as you can, proofread it, all the other things are in place, and then submit. Because once you hit the submit button, that's it. We can have a discussion, but that won't change your status. I won't send it back and say, fix all 3 of those pages and send it back. All right, so make sure you give it your best shot.
So one more thing, Mr. Wilkinson.
Mhm.
So in terms of the 1,000 words, what penalties is there for being over, or, well, it's no minimum, right? So what would be there? Would there be a penalty for over the 1,000 words?
How much over?
I got it to like 1,153.
No, you're not going to be penalized for that. Certainly not
Okay.
not in my class. Now, if you went to 1,500 to 2,000, well, you could lose credit for that. Not much, but some. But for 100 or 100 or 2 over, no, that's fine.
So, Mr. Wilkinson,
Hi.
the crazy man, the psychologist, Mr. Freud. Oh, why you laugh? They thought that
I'm laughing at how you call his name.
his theory was a fraud because he didn't run no tests.
Right.
But his theory still stands today, right?
Some of it, yeah. Some people
Okay.
still believe it.
Yeah. So
And
fraud isn't derived from his name. It's just similar. It just happens to be a similarity, right?
somewhat of a similarity.
Where you laugh,
Why do you say it's a similarity?
because that's what the start. That's what the thing say. But I Googled it up, and he was big.
Yeah, Freud was definitely a man before his time in terms of his theories. But, you know, you
He
say
died.
that,
He died the same year when the case study happened.
oh, really?
Yeah, he died in 1939.
See,
Mr. Wilkinson, sorry, I lost right now as to what you all are talking about.
oh, Danielle wants to know what the hell you talking about, Gretchen.
Because I asked him
I-
because this is a 12-page case study, and I don't remember specifically talking about anyone in particular, rather than just a bunch of case studies.
Let me tell you all something. You see that same thing? I took a picture of that, and I had to dig deep to find out the little bit of information I found out.
Well, what she wants to know, Gretchen, is why the hell did you bring up Sigmund Freud in the first place?
Because they use his psychological theory about why people commit fraud. He think it's psychological, like they have a mental disorder.
Danielle, are you getting it now?
Yes, no, I almost thought you were saying there was a case study specifically on him. I just was verifying because
No, 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 no,
No, no,
not at all. She was
it's
okay,
a whole write up on him.
yeah, we're not interested
right.
in
Yeah.
Freud and his theories at this point. It's just that because Gretchen was being so bloody diligent and doing her research paper, she happened to run across the psychological reasons as to why people are called usually TIFAs. In other words, why they commit fraud. And
Because he thinks it's a psychological disorder.
yeah,
These
yeah,
people
yeah.
have mental issues, so they can't help themselves because it's a mental disorder.
Sure, like alcoholics, rapists, and other crazy people who do crazy stuff rather than just call a spade a spade. The problem with Freud is he was not a believer in God. He believed in just existence. And so therefore,
Unless he was crazy. So people believe he was a fraud because he never actually practiced it. He just had theory, but not no substantial practical work to actually back up what he is saying. But
like
some people
so
still
like
believe it.
like so many other frauds, and you could believe anything you want. Just make sure
Right. They trying to say he was a fraud. I don't
just
know. So
just make sure you believe in what is substantial and correct. Otherwise, dog eat your lunch. But you know what, Gretchen? The point that's important here is all of a sudden, persons in your class have been enlightened about Sigmund Freud, in this case, from a Freud perspective, all because of a research paper uh, that you had to do. And what am I saying? These classroom sessions, these discussions, these readings, and these research papers, they are not designed only to make you miserable. You are expected to come out of these sessions better than you came in and more curious than you may have been before. That is the essence of learning. How about that? So for those of you who may have thought that you wasted 12 weeks, you did not. The persons who didn't do the course, they wasted 12 weeks because you are now far more enlightened in so many ways than they are. How about that? And so I say that to encourage you to get out there and prepare for your bloody test next week. Study hard and give it your best shot. Okay?
Everybody's so scared now.
All right.
Everybody's scared.
You guys take care. Be safe out there. COVID is still there. The war is still on in Ukraine. Please make sure you take care of yourself as you try to get through all of these challenges. For you mothers who have done this course with your little children, kudos to you. That's another separate, amazing job altogether. And let me just say, as the occupier of an empty nest these days, my children grew up far too quickly, even though at the time it appears that they were not growing at all. All right, so all I can tell you, do not see them as a burden. Teach them everything they need to know. Enjoy every day with them. The time passes quickly. Okay? My baby is already 25. I wouldn't talk about little Sam, my oldest son. I don't know what the hell happened, where the time went, and I happen to have been a 24-hour dad from delivery straight up to when they moved away to start their lives. So I make no mistake about it. Time goes quickly. All right, so kudos to you moms who are doing all this stuff with your little ones. All right, that's a big deal. Enjoy them, have fun with them, and don't let anybody get in your way as far as that is concerned. All right, take care, and you guys, I'll see you next week. Good luck with your studies and good luck in your exam next week. All right.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Good night. Take care.